Hello and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abby, and today I invite you to join me in something a little different. I was recently able to attend the Relating Systems Thinking and Design Conference in Toronto, Canada. If you've listened to any of the episodes from this past year, you've probably heard me mention this conference. A number of our previous guests and conversation partners came out of relationships I built during last year's conference, and so I was very excited to go back. I just found it to be such a wonderful environment for collective learning. This year, I was able to host what we're calling a participant podcast. So today's episode is pretty long, and it is a collection of a number of different conversations that I had with participants over the 3 days of the in-person conference, which took place at OCAD University in Toronto. For me and for all of us, this was a total experiment. I've never done podcasting on the go. So there was a lot to learn in the moment, a lot of emergence. So forgive any wonky audio. We were in a loud public space as we were recording. And so I have put my audio editing skills to the test here. And intentionally, I want to say too, I haven't provided much more context or done any of my own additional meaning making out of the conversations I had. What I was hoping to do here is just offer a glimpse and to capture in recording a sliver of the conversations that happen at a gathering like this. These rich moments of in-between time, between sessions, between workshops, between people running from one place to the next, where we collide with each other and connect and explore new ideas and learn things from each other. So again, today's episode, we've got a number of conversation partners that I'm very excited for you to hear from. So if you were at the conference, this might be meaningful for you. You might recognize some of the themes. And if you have no idea what this is about, did not attend, I hope that you'll still find some interest here, even if you don't fully understand the context. I would just have you look out for any ideas that resonate with you, any ideas that excite you, and use that as a first turn in your own conversations. So thank you so much for listening to this very long episode. Feel free to take it in chunks. Music breaks up each conversation, so that hopefully is a little easier to navigate. And let's begin this participant podcast.
Okay, I'm Mario Marquez Lartigue from Mexico City. I'm a founder of the Laboratorio para el Cambio, Lab for Change, which is an organization, an emergent organization that's still to be happened, but it's already happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so I'm building this space that everybody asks me, so what is it going to be for? And I have like 1,000 ideas, which I usually have. So I exactly don't know what it's going to be about, but it's an open space that will be used for maybe fostering relationships and community and dialogue and play and gathering and ceremony and whatever else comes through.
Yeah, were you just in the keynote with
Oh, yeah.
Good Child? Yes, I like it. She was talking about less nouns, more verbs, and I think we get stuck talking what's something about instead of what it is, what the living, breathing thing of it is.
That's right. That's exactly right. Take a space for the emergent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What's your emergent experience of RSD been so far?
Oh, it's very good. Very good. In the online talks and in the now starting with the presentation with Melanie and Leslie. I'm very excited. I'm very happy to be here and belonging to this community because I think we're like-minded people that are actually trying to draw something new or making space for it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hosted a great workshop yesterday. Do you want to say anything about that for people listening?
Okay. I give a workshop that's called Making Nonsense, a game of design ambiguity for shaping our collective identity. And it was a It was really fun. You were there.
It was really fun.
Yeah. What can you say about it?
I think so important for us to practice the skill of nonsense. We're so quick to, pattern recognition is the name of the game for our brains in so many ways, but we lose some curiosity, some creativity, some imagination, I think, when we interact at the speed of our expectations. That's something I learned about from Rachel Lilly, who's also here this week. And so when we create space for the nonsense, for the incoherence, for the unexpected, then so many possibilities emerge. So I saw that in your workshop for sure.
Can you pick something out that standed out for you, like something that standed out or in the workshop?
Yeah, something
Sure.
I even spoke about during the workshop was it brought up feelings of memories of when I was younger and being in similar experiences where I was invited to play. And even though I was a kid, and I'm kind of the story I told, I was thinking about like my middle school self maybe. And so there's, it's not so safe, I think, for many of us to feel like we can be different or playful or silly or weird. The name of the game is fitting in, I think, for so many kids. You feel like that's the safer way. And so these games that invited us to play were my nightmare. I just was so instantly anxious and how am I going to be perceived? And okay, it's cool and not weird. And I'd rather just not play at all because it didn't feel like a safe space to play. And so those memories were coming up for me. And then I was thinking about myself now, or still carrying some of that with me. We carry all of the versions of ourselves that we are with us, but trying to shed some of that and say, well, this is a safe space to play. And you created that and setting the tone for the session. And so we did the exercise going around the circle, everyone doing different vocalizations, and then the fellow members of the circle repeating those back to us and creating a kind of a song or a musical or auditory, at least, experience together. And feeling like some of those feelings still bubbled up for me of, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be bad at this. But that's not really the measurement of quote unquote success. The real quote unquote success of that is the relationality that happens and the playfulness that happens. So you really opened up that space for me.
Perfect. It went full circle for you. So we started there, and then I know you're like, oh, he's back again.
But this is the same. Yeah.
But it was really fun and interesting. A lot of things happened. One that picked up for me that was really fun was when we were doing the human mic.
Yeah.
And the new member came in and the whole group started to talking. And that's immersions, right? Like there were no rules. That was like, the only thing was we need to repeat. We didn't know how the voice was going to be carried.
Yeah.
And that was a fun moment for me.
And I think some people with their, system designer brains on came in and saw you facilitating this workshop with these 4 different activities and wanted to say, well, what success have you seen with this? Or just trying to understand, this is a really practiced workshop and you have results. And that's why you're presenting to us here because it's tried and true and tested. Yeah. And I think you were really saying this is actually a new thing. And you're inviting us to be a part of more of the messy middle of the emergence of being a part of the experience rather than saying, here's this workshop, do these things, achieve this. It was a lot more emergent than that, I thought.
Yeah. And the idea of not having actually like a purpose or the purpose of making nonsense, right? Like actually just trying to make nonsense.
Yep.
And the group always make no sense.
Mm-hmm.
We hide it very well, right?
Absolutely.
I guess that's why team sports and teamwork, it's always like so hard because we try always to make sense and to really be coherent, but it's difficult, right? What I like about play, even in sports, is that's the goal of it, right? Like we kick a ball, right? Or we throw a ball because we know that in the air and in the running, something is going to happen, something magical. And that's why we watch sports and we play it, right? Because we know that there's magic there or dance or whatever performance.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say, Mario?
Oh, that I'm happy to be here. Happy to meet you.
Yes.
And let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Mario.
No problem.
Appreciate it. Okay, well, welcome. Okay, so We can talk about anything. Again, there's no wrong answer. So just introduce yourself, tell us your name and whatever you want us to know about you.
Okay, I'm Victoria V. I don't know that I want anyone to know anything about me.
That's okay too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm very curious mostly to hear about people's experiences this week, but also to situate it in the larger context of what's your relationship to systems thinking and design. Is this a new space for you? Is this something you feel very comfortable in? How are you arriving to this space?
Yeah. That's a lot of questions.
It is.
I think it's been very interesting for me to come to this experience at a time in my life where, from the outside in, I'm least qualified to be here.
Okay.
So my education is very formal, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon. I worked for 15 years in Washington, D.C. within like very large systems. And right now I own a small company in Idaho, which to me feels like the middle of absolutely nowhere. And I'm physically on my feet 8 to 12 hours a day. And my life has, from the outside again, like nothing to do with this. And yet I have always been a systems thinker.
Yeah.
The first job I explicitly took in design was a human-centered design role. And even going into that job, I remember thinking that why on earth would we design things from a human-centered perspective or need to call it out, considering that that's all we ever do?
Right.
Makes no sense. Like, we're not additive when we're just thinking about ourselves. And at what point are we actually going to take a step back and be real about how intersectional we are with different cultures and different entities and this overwhelming power of us and other is so incredibly detrimental, I think, spiritual to the way that we are. And then there's just ripple effects and fractals throughout the rest of the world.
It's so incredible that you brought up the language of human-centered design because I just encountered that this morning. Again, I've heard it before, and it just sparked something for me too, where I was like, I can see, kind of zoom out and see how maybe this language emerged out of a context that felt like it was profit-centered design, money-centered, economic, so I could see it as a response to that. But with the conversations I've already had in just 1.5 days of this, and the online, this conference has already been going on for a couple of weeks, but just the 2 days that we've been in person here, I'm already seeing, like you're saying, human-centered is maybe a good jumping off point for where we need to turn our attention to next, which would be greater than human. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about the non-human stakeholder, which is a step, you think? And it is. It just is really for us in my world of interpersonal communication rooted in social constructionism. And so saying that we're all these active participants who are co-creating meaning.
Yeah.
And so for me, a really important skill for systemic designers, which by the way, let's just say anybody's a systemic designer, even if, you and I are like that was an experience I had last year at this conference. My first time sitting in a group of people who are all introducing themselves as this kind of designer or that kind of designer. Yeah. I was like, oh my God, what am I supposed to say? Am I allowed to call myself a designer? I think we all are in some ways, but it's how are we reflecting on the meaning that we've been handed?
Yeah.
Because somebody somewhere made a choice.
Yep.
And over again, it got socially constructed. And how might we want to make meaning differently? And so what does it mean to be an individual in a system? What power do you have as an individual to shape the system? And how's the system shaping you as an individual in relationships?
Yep. And all I can think of right now are monkeys. Yeah, what you're saying about like the individual actor within a system, and part of what was talked about this morning from Leslie Ann was really like the part of a systemic designer. And I would argue any human or any entity, it's a question of recognizing that you have impact.
Yes.
But there's a story about monkeys, and I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to try it anyway. There's like a monkey that climbs up a ladder and he throws poop down to keep the other monkeys from coming up. And then the next one does it, and the next one does it, and the next one does it. And the entire purpose of it from the beginning was protective in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But that's no longer needed.
Yeah.
And we have to continue to look back at these stories we've told and the histories that we know, the pieces that we know, and ask the question of, okay, the Industrial Revolution is a lot of what created the divisions, the silos, the specializations, the move away from systemic design, the move away from being part of nature, this overwhelming desire to have, a European lifestyle, and so on and so on and so on. And we have to acknowledge the stories of history in order to also stop and say, like, okay, well, there was a time where throwing poop was necessary. There was a time when the Industrial Revolution solved problems, but we're not there now. So, what is the gift that we project into the future? Back to Milani's
Yeah.
talk this morning. And I thought that the magic that was in what and how she said that and how she expressed that through the ancestry and our future ancestry was a place we should all sit in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ree. This is great. What's your name?
Willow Gaithwick. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I am here with ETH Zurich and the Monteviso Institute. I'm part of their advanced studies in regenerative design.
Awesome.
So they invited me here, and I'm really excited. I was so inspired and thrilled by Melanie's talk. I kind of wrote a poem, thought it would be kind of relevant to share.
Yeah, please read us your poem.
What if I leave the world, become sower of a never-ending garden, and we are the universe? I want to create an environment, not list of instructions, a place for you to be, and so this is how we speak, in fullness and emptiness, the potential left open on agar medium. Music and meaning flow from strange fruits that drip wild like cherry breast or sour apples. I want to propose a relationship, score between space and time, but not defined by them. You and me and we dance between made-up notes, though I intend to make a forest, not a song, and I confuse the two, and this is the most colorful sound. Explore my head as it spills into your reality. It is an illness we imagine could happen. I negotiate the invitation to heal. Parable of the Sower.
Will you introduce yourself? Say your name one more time now that we're recording. And anything you'd like to share to introduce yourself.
Okay, hello there. My name is Humam, and I am originally Syrian, and I moved to Canada 2 years ago. I lived my life as a refugee for the past 10 years, and now I'm here trying to navigate the identity of being a Syrian after all the complexities we've been through. Yeah, that's me so far.
Yes, great place to start. And I will just instantly bring in something that you brought up in a workshop that we were both in yesterday was really interesting to me because, like I shared with you before we started recording, I have this lens of social construction. Meaning is something we make together. And so it's really interesting to me, and I think rich and helpful to think about identity as something that's being socially constructed, because you shared that of all the places you lived, you didn't know if you necessarily felt connected identity-wise to any of these locations. But once you met a community of other refugees, that was an identity. And so just taking a social constructionist lens on that makes perfect sense to me, and is something that I think a lot of people would benefit from if they also have that kind of more expansive, more generative, more participatory, that you get to participate, you get to make the meaning for yourself of how you want to identify or not.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Honestly, like throughout my experience, I started to realize that identity itself or belonging itself is not a simple term as we all think it is.
Yeah, right.
We all try to find something bigger than our individuality. We all try to but we never face it. Like, we all think that we belong from where we came from, right? But a lot of us, like me, for instance, I mean, I thought that for a long time. And every time I tried to belong to my people, whether it was Syrians, whether it was like religious communities, sometimes, like wherever you actually think that you fit, you realize that it's not always the case. Sometimes the shared values, sometimes it's just a simple football team. Sometimes it's just like anything that you feel you shared the experience with, and people that shared that experience actually align with you is where you belong at this point. That's where I feel I am right now, especially So when I came to Canada, I didn't know what did I want to do. My background in sociology is a very broad thing, right? So you don't know where do you want to what do you want to do or where do you want to go. So I want to do something related to my people, something related to the culture, and to engage more with my identity, with who I am, right? So I started working at an MP office, member of parliament. And that's where I started to see how people or everyone is facing the problem of identity. Everyone is trying
Yeah.
so hard to belong, uh, but by the simplest terms, And I did some social work, and that's where I started to see the systems and the complexity of the systems. And sometimes the struggles we go through make us even forget that we have to belong to something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I have in a lot of things, I really like this imagery of like holding something with open hands, where it's like you have this identity, and there's a lot of ways that labels, like identity labels, are really helpful, because a really important piece of communication is naming. Because if you don't have the language to talk about what you experience, then you don't talk about what you experience. And so there's labels around things like identity are really helpful to an extent. So that's the holding in the hands. But those hands have to be open, because, like you're saying, your identity, what you relate to, who you find community with, how you make sense of yourself and who you are in the world, that is something that's going to change over time as you have experience, like you said. So I like this image of like holding it with open hands, that you get to own the labeling that you say you want to use in your life for yourself. And it's a very open and flexible thing, I think.
Very flexible. I mean, like you grow up in or we generally grow up in a sense of wanting to belong to something.
Right. Yeah.
But now I'm realizing that this rigid identity is so fluid, and it can be like I've read a lot I've read a lot about the term third space,
Yeah.
which is you and me belonging in specific spaces, but sometimes we don't feel that we belong to it. So the third space is when you belong with the people that sharing the same experiences you go.
Yeah, right.
And that's where a lot of immigrants and refugees are feeling at this point. And that's why shout out to all my refugees friends. Like we all feel this lost.
Yeah.
We all feel like a bit lost at some point. And yeah, it's just a message for everyone who feels this emptiness inside them, that we're all there, we've all been there, and there's a space for all of us, that we just need to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Belonging is so important. And then I think, the session that we were in, and I actually spoke to Mario earlier for this podcast, so he'll be on the recording, that session being about making nonsense. And I'm just really interested in that disorientation or discomfort that people feel when you don't feel that sense of belonging, when you feel that like, kind of feelings start to rise in you of, in a workshop space like that, moments that are uncertain. I think we're kind of conditioned to be like, oh, something must have gone wrong.
Yeah.
If there's like an awkward pause.
Yeah.
Or a moment where you've asked a question, we don't know how to respond. But I think that if we could build up the tolerance to those moments of discomfort where you could pay attention to the fact that I don't really feel like I belong here right now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So how do you interact from that space of non-belonging? But also, again, this both and of holding with open hands, the belonging that you can find, and how do you act into that when you do find it is important for informing how you act when you don't have it too.
Exactly. I mean, eventually as humans, I think we somehow talked about it yesterday in Mario's session, which is like humans in general want basically one thing, which is to be happy. This is even anthropologically proven that the main thing of survival is people thriving to be happy. Like we want to buy a big house because it makes us feel something, but eventually it leads us to happiness, right? So same with identity, same with belonging, as you were saying.
Right.
Like us belonging to something bigger than us is basically psychologically and anthropologically satisfying for our being,
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting to me, because when I think about like interpersonal communication, a space that a lot of people are familiar with or already have an idea of where they might go to improve their interpersonal communication would be therapy, which is a luxury for people to be able to do that and afford. And so thinking about like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's truth to that, I think, especially in living in where I live in the United States under capitalism. There's a lot of truth that like you have to have these basic things to then have a job, to then get money to survive, to give you the luxury to do these other things. But also, I have some conflict around that because I don't think that people should see investing learning or practice of their interpersonal relationships and their communication as being something that can wait. I think it's incredibly urgent. And so there's a different world where I think it's the bottom of the pyramid, or it's happening as like a braid that I think should be woven in, that bettering interpersonal communication, because again, this is my field, interpersonal communication. There are theories and theorists. I got a whole degree in it. There's so many people that have studied this.
Yep.
It's a really rich field. And that knowledge is just being gatekept, and it's just getting dusty in my comm theory textbooks. Instead of this should be something that everybody should have access to, I guess is what I'm saying. And so how are these like the things that like the fact that we get to be at this conference right now is a privilege, and the ideas that we're playing with, it would be wonderful if more people had access to. And so for me, it is a big question of access, and how do you make it more open to invite more people into these conversations, because it shouldn't just be the academics that get to talk about how can we create better social worlds through better communication, but the people that actually act into the social worlds, every single one of us should have that tools and languages.
If you don't engage with the people who are basically your audience,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to know what they actually want. Like if they're not a part of the conversation, I totally agree on this. If they're not a part of the conversation, they wouldn't be able to, like even academics wouldn't be able to figure out what is actually going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the part that I like about that I'm seeing in this conference, and the idea of systems thinking or design as something that is participatory. But it is, how are we acting into it, and how are we creating the system as we act into it? And yeah, it's just, on and on and on.
I know. Yeah. Well, I agree. And like, I don't know. I'm happy to be here. Like, I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the rest of the symposium, for the rest of the event. And I think it's a great event because it just gathers a lot of, like, what I'm finding interesting is I'm seeing a lot of backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like people from, I met someone who's working with like on quantum physics and connecting systems with quantum physics. It's not my background, but it's very interesting.
There's so much to learn from each other, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm actually enjoying the fact that I have the chance and the opportunity to meet with all these people, connect with them, and learn from them, from different experiences, and basically reflect on mine, right?
Yeah.
My name is Dongin Shin. I'm originally from South Korea, but I've been living in New York City for, I think, 2 decades. And I do actually product management, somewhat of extensively, but yes, that's what I do.
Okay, very cool. And what brings you to RSD this year?
So I've been actually regular in years back in the early seasons, but then I had my son and all, life. So I haven't been able to actually come back. And then now that I have a little more time in my life, I was like, why not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are you seeing are differences in this conference or this community, or what's being talked about now versus when maybe the last time you were here was?
Yeah, I think the last time, I think that I was actually here last OCAD RSD as well. I don't remember which version of it, but
Yeah.
definitely I think this time, and I think it was also a very significant sort of mark being made of me, is that indigenous sort of that thread that Canada absolutely having, and I mean honestly the whole world should be having, but not. So that was really different in how we bring that relationality in the systemic thinking, because I always thought of systems thinking is really that thinking about that chain reaction, the relations within.
Mhm.
But I don't think that we've been talking about systems in that manner as much so far.
Mhm.
So I think this was very timely in that manner.
Yeah, absolutely. The last year was my first RSD experience, and I think idea that I really clung to, that I've really reflected on the past year, is just the idea of collective learning. That so many of the sessions, so many of the workshops were kind of set up this way, and that has really helped me in my podcast too. Because in my normal episodes of this podcast, I have a guest, and I'm kind of talking to them about their life, and I've talked to a lot of really cool people. Some of the people who are giving keynotes here today or give keynotes last year at this conference even. And so it's easy to kind of sit back into this role of, oh, well, let me just kind of sit at your feet and learn from you. But I think there's a little more beauty and a little more creativity and curiosity and new things get imagined when I step up to a conversation and say, well, actually, I think I have something to contribute too. And in this podcast, it's me talking about a communication perspective and saying, hey, we're taking communication for granted in so many ways. And so what changes when we actually look at our communication?
Yeah.
And so I think this idea of collective learning is, so many of us have gone through school where it's teacher standing at the front of the classroom, students sitting at the desk, you're being talked at for, however many years, or in whatever ways people have experienced school and learning in that way. There's a different kind of learning that happens conversationally like this. And so I think, like you're talking about, bringing in Indigenous perspectives, which we heard about today in the sessions. It's just, at its core, there's so much to learn from each other. And I think we open ourselves up to a lot of possibilities when we can situate ourselves as one perspective of many to be learned from.
Yeah.
There's not one right and wrong, but many to be learned from, as I said.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's so funny because I started mentoring somebody, and the mentee really wanted to learn about systems thinking. And the way how I described it was like, it's really about the scale and sort of start recognizing where you belong and what it actually systems that is around you that actually makes the larger picture.
Yeah.
And because I think that also in the industry in general, systems thinking just like sounds like a nice word.
Yeah, right.
Right. Like just like a design thinking is nice word. Yeah. So yeah. And I think this year feels more smaller community than the ones before, which I kind of like in a very different manner. Yeah.
Yeah. There's more opportunities for these
Yeah.
one-on-ones. I think for me, the value that I find in, again, the conversations that are able to happen in a conference like this are because we bump up against so many of those buzzwords, basically, is that you're talking about, that I think they're buzzwords for a reason, because they started somewhere really meaningful and then get overused. And so I feel like a lot of these sessions, like what we've got to experience today and this week, are kind of a bringing back to what's the original core of why we all do what we do, or why we like to talk about systems thinking. It's not just a buzzword. It's not just surface level for the people here.
Yeah.
And so what does it mean to each of us? And then what does it look like to practice for each of us?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely bring me back to why I started what I started in my design journey and things that I've forgotten about, because now I'm, commercial tech word where sort of systems thinking is used in a very specific manner to exploit it, actually. But bringing back to actually, this is actually to envision and create a better world that we all live in.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, so it's for me, it's also so much about reigniting where I started.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm glad that you're finding some spark here for that. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
I just hope that this community continues and really becomes a strong foundation for all these practitioners. Because I think, as I said, I think systems thinking being misused, so to speak, or the methodology and the skill sets and the diagrams being used for completely different contexts. So I just hope that the practitioner would actually be able to spread the word more and, being able to actually bring the society more together, because we need that more than ever, especially in America. But yeah.
It's funny because we are in a very public area.
Yeah.
So I've never done anything like this. Okay. So Luis Garcia, Ecuadorian design researcher. I'm in my final year of the transition design PhD in Carnegie Mellon. And there my research tries to understand how people working in transitions when they are dealing with different systemic barriers and what kind of knowledge and skills they need to achieve that work, and how can we be better at thinking of designing for transitions but more from within, leveraging existing knowledge and skills and thinking about power as a key component of how transitions happen. And well, there are many other things that
Absolutely.
I'll be able to mention.
Okay, well, keeping in mind the keynote that we just heard from Gerald Midgley, is there, in terms of transition design, is there something that you could highlight that is the quote unquote everyday practice of that? Because like I shared with you, my lens is this interpersonal. And so I'm really interested as individuals within systems, what power do we have, or how does the system empower individuals within it? And so is there a kind of everyday practice of transition design that you could speak about?
As in something that can ignite those transitions more from an everyday perspective. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So kind of just making a distinction between, rather than speaking to, okay, you're a designer or you're a consultant and you've been brought into a project to facilitate some major transition for an organization.
Right.
What about the people within systems?
Yeah.
Families,
Yeah,
relationships,
yeah.
communities, or organizations that are experiencing transitions themselves? How do people better act into?
Yeah. Well, to me, is so there's a broader umbrella of designing for transitions, and underneath that, you have different groups and people doing establishing fields or practices or work that respond to that. And speaking of the one that I'm situated at, so the transition design with like uppercase as a field that was established at CMU and all that. One of the things that I've always found really compelling is in their framework, they talk a lot about mindset and posture. And I think that one is probably one that I see a lot of potential on, especially on the at the individual level, at a smaller scale of sort of rethinking how we relate to each other and with the world, um, and healing that has been broken from us in relation to that. And I think you can enact that in everyday actions. As there can be like hundreds of examples, I think, but if we pay attention to like from where we acting and who we are and how we as individuals are also in transition through, I think there's a lot of potential that can be ignited from there. And then we can think about like the broader, more systemic kind of change and work. And I like the question too, because I think there's a lot of many times I have questioned how, when we're looking at things from like a really broad lens, and I mean, we're in a conference that sort of like
Exactly.
fits to that in some shape or form, it can also create a bit of a freezing effect, in a sense of like hopelessness, because there's so much that it's outside of your control. One of the things I'm going to be talking about later in this great talk that I have of a course that I teach, when I'm teaching undergrads these kinds of topics on systems, and they are mapping complexity and doing all that stuff, a lot of them tend to have a lot of resistance because they don't see the point when they think about what they're doing in relation to the agency and power they have as individuals. And like with the things that they are learning in other classes and all that as designers, like what can we do if governments don't change, if policies are not enacted, things like that. And so it can sound a bit cliche and kind of idealistic to say, well, let's start at the individual from the individual, and how do you change, and then how you can ignite change in the system. Maybe, but also maybe not. Maybe there is something good that can come out of that. So
I think it's important that like marriage of the zooming out and the zooming in, which is what I feel like my work is about, is that very briefly, CMM is the theory of communication I work with. That's coordinated management of meaning. So saying communication is a coordinated management of meaning. It's in direct response to a way oversimplistic view of communication that a lot of people still hold, that's rooted in what's called the transmission model. Sender, receiver, message.
It's just one directional.
Right. It emerged out of like radio frequencies. And that's how communication works for radio frequencies. But human beings are so much more complex. There's meaning that's being made. And so there's an interesting conversation around intent and impact as well. And I see kind of like a communication perspective as being the bridge to say, well, communication creates our social world. We make meaning together. And so I, as the speaker, again, there's a very rich field of interpersonal communication. There's a lot of tools and theories and perspectives that can help you be a more informed everyday communicator to acknowledge, well, I'm showing up to this conversation with a lot of stories and from different contexts than you might be showing up with. We don't have to make explicit. We can. That's great to name things, but we don't have to necessarily make explicit the context we're both showing up with. But acknowledging that you're showing up with different contexts than me helps me to better engage with you as a person with a story that may be different than mine that can coexist among many stories. We're at this conference right now. There's 100 people here.
Right.
We all are, engaging with systems thinking and design. And that probably means something a little different to each of us. And there's space for that. And so I think on the individual level, again, individual acting within a system, it's do the participants of the system have a sense of themselves as active participants with the ability to co-create meaning together in a way that creates, to go back to the name of the conference, these arcs of impact that then shape the larger social.
Well, yeah. I think this is really relevant for today's world, even more so when I once heard from someone that the biggest challenge that we have in our world today is not global warming, it's not climate change. It's actually extreme polarization. And because we are at a point where we can talk to each other, like I feel like a lot of what you're talking about is that glue that we're losing, that bridge that allows us to act against some of all those bigger issues. Is like we know for a fact that climate change is a massive challenge, but we also know a lot of things that can be done to address it, but we can't do it because we don't agree with each other. We cannot even sit on the same table to talk. It's in the US, especially with everything that's going on, people have been talking a lot about how, in the past, you could have a Republican and Democrat in the same family having dinner and having a critical conversation, all that. But now people like hate each other. Like they don't want to hear, they don't want to see. And it's so sad and concerning when we think about like how our future looks, because we can do anything, right? Like we can do anything if we're not open to hear each other's perspectives and like what's right, what's wrong, being open to that difference in perspective and understanding that we don't necessarily always hold the truth.
Like you said, it's just a question of communication, and I'm like on a personal mission to advocate for like that question of communication. It doesn't have to be left up to chance, or it doesn't have to feel so abstract. Right. There's a lot of really concrete tools about how each of us could better communicate with each other towards whatever goals. And again, just the heart of the idea is that it's the quality. If we pay more attention to the quality of our processes of engaging, the quality of the relating we're doing, how does the space that we create in a classroom, like you said, you're an educator, how does the space that you create communicate to students kind of permission about how they're allowed to show up there? And then what ideas emerge, what creativity or imagination is able to emerge because you've intentionally created a communicative system where people can show up as them full selves, as like someone mentioned earlier today in the welcome. But that's something that we're trying to do. And so it's an intentional communicative process of creating that.
Yeah. Do you think there are like some steps that you need to take before creating those spaces?
I think what for me is the very first step that I guess this is going to sound backwards. I just think my broadest sense is that communication is taken for granted as a constructive, generative process, a real thing that we're engaging in, not just a means to an end, but its own generative process. And so I think before you invite, and, we're about to hear from Rachel Lilly for a talk soon, and I've actually had her on my podcast. She talks about assumptions and expectations. And so our expectations and our assumptions about how other people are making meaning of things really get in the way. And so I think before you could go into a systems design perspective and think about transitions, think about change making, you have to make sure that the participants have the perspective of themselves as co-creators. So I think that's the foundational thing of we can't take it for granted. And so in CMM terms, the way that I see it is that a little bit like Gerald shared today in his keynote about how do you invite people into this practice is I break it down, seeing, doing, being. Seeing is that communication perspective. You're starting to say some of this language around collaboration and emergence and dialogue and co-creation. These are some CMM-ish buzzwords I think a lot of people are familiar with, but maybe just don't have the container of CMM to make sense of them. And so are you kind of looking out for those things? Can you begin to pay attention to those? And then there's a lot of tools and practices, and that's the doing. Can you start to implement these models and begin to, do these in practice? And that it becomes a lens. It becomes embodied. And for me, it's this is just how I engage with the world. I cannot take my CMM glasses off because I'm always looking through this lens.
Yeah, I think to me, what it seems like that is that there's some work that needs to be done at the individual level, but more the person needs to understand their values and their positionality first. And I was asking you this because part of what I'm writing my dissertation right now, and it's funny because I shouldn't probably be in the conference. I should be writing it. But one of the things that I'm trying to articulate there is the importance of positionality beyond a single statement on before a project and all that. But as having a deeper understanding of how that influences how we act and how we relate to each other, and then of course how that influences in any other work that would so. And for that, I think there's a lot of reflexive practice that needs to happen across me as an individual, and then aligning or understanding where the differences can merge with others. So how, because your positionality is relational too, and so when you put it when you put yourself out there and you're starting to collaborate with others or thinking about complex challenges or whatever, you are constantly confronting your own positionality, negotiating it.
Yeah.
And to me, all of that is key before we jump to any, methodologies, tools that they're doing, as you were calling it, that they make. And hopefully that decreases the risk of making some mistakes.
My name is Hannah Goss. It's so nice to be back in Toronto here with you, Abby. I'm originally from Mississauga. I moved to the Netherlands about 7 years ago, so where I'm visiting from this week. I work as a researcher in the Systemic Design Lab in UDEL.
What's your experience of design been like in these two different places?
Yeah, well, I did my undergrad at Carleton, so in Ottawa. And I mean, we had a part of a floor of the engineering building. We had, 30 people, I think, in my graduating class in the fourth year. You had access to your studio 24/7. You had a much more intimate relationship, actually, with the students and the teachers. And then Delft, I mean, there's 300 students in the master's that I and as a whole, they have their own building and the size. Of course, it comes with pros in that a lot of expertise, a lot of variety, a lot of choices in the electives and the expansion of the design perspective.
Yeah, I think that is really special. Makes me think of my own experience at my degree that I originally started in a different program and kind of found my way to interpersonal communication. It was so much about the people. I would hear about students that, people that I knew that I lived near in the dorms in other programs who got no time with their professors, who didn't even know that, it was just really different relationships create really different contexts
experiences
to be able to learn it.
Yeah. I think that's what's so great about being part of the systemic design lab or here, RSD. And Gerald this morning said it in his keynote. I also feel like these are kind of the people, and from different backgrounds, different places, geographically, physically, in general, where they land in, relating systems thinking and design. But it's still such a nice community to date in, to share, the stories that we're talking about, the openness that comes with being in a vulnerable context, sharing and sitting with you here today to talk about these things. It is about communication.
It absolutely is. And thinking back on my own experience, I felt so intimidated last year, my very first RSD, that I was like, I'm kind of just here as a part of this group. I just happened to get the chance to come here and I said yes. I'm just figuring it out as I go. And so, and that is good to be in that not knowing position of you said, well, let me try to take things in and let me learn. But I think also, again, a testament to this community is that I instantly did feel like, well, I think I have something to offer here too. And I think that I don't have to shrink myself or apologize or, make the qualifications for, well, I'm not a designer. I'm not a what. So I don't. Every person here, I think, still has something really valuable to offer. And it's not, I've been to some other conferences that are like, they have a much more academic bent to it. And there's a lot of like hierarchy, elitism. And so that's why I wanted to come back this year, because I was like, oh, this was a really great learning space. Like, it's just that like sense of like, oh, I feel like I'm back in school in the best way. I'm like, this is what I loved about school. This is the learning and the conversations and the different ideas moving around, just getting to build these little relationships and have these little moments of communication with people throughout the week.
It happened yesterday morning in Amelie, what she said about like leaving, go with the stories and leave the worry sort of. This is the one community that I really feel like, I can do that. Of course, sometimes it can be scary talking about cybernetics or quantum theory that I know absolutely nothing about. But then I can also sit on a panel and kind of say, I don't know anything, so I'm going to come open-minded, ask a question. And there's not that fear of being, you're stupid. Yeah, what are you talking about? As you say, you don't need to apologize from the point that you're bringing into the conversation within this community. And also why I love it,
It's a little journey that I'm on for myself, is that I really hate being new at things.
Yeah.
It's such a vulnerable feeling.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's a family therapist who practices in the UK that I work closely with named John Burnham. And he talks about, there's the not knowing position from, I think, Bateson.
Yeah.
And especially, in his context of family therapy, that you act like you don't know. But he talks about the actually not knowing position. And I think that is, so interesting. And because I think there's so many ways in which we're like, thinking about myself, it's like, in high school, everyone's like, oh, did you see that show? Do you know that? I'm like, yeah, I see, because I want to fit in, so you pretend to know. But there's so much value. It's that what kind of questions, what kind of curiosity, what kind of creativity does not happen when we act like we already know everything. And so I think there's actually a lot of richness in actually not knowing.
A lot of this is talking about systems change. My work is transition design. Well, I don't know what that food system should be. If we knew, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in now. And it's about coming with ideas, putting them on the table, talking about them, refining them together, questioning it together. And if you come from a place of it's this way or the highway, or I know everything, this is the only way we can do it, and you're not going to be able to figure out what are these systems, what's desirable, where do we want to move towards that. I think that's like where the power comes in, in these interactions.
Yeah. And what really makes me want to talk with you even more beyond today is what you shared in your brief presentation yesterday about your paper and the idea of complexity and how it was woven in, because that's how I see the CMM theory kind of role it has is the theory itself is very complex, which creates its own, I think, barriers or, opportunities for creativity around how you might talk about it. But it's necessarily complex because the social worlds we live in are complex. Our relationships are complex. Our communication is complex. So it has to be complex if it's going to say anything true, anything real about our complex worlds. And so for me, the theory is about equipping people to navigate the complexity. It just fact of life.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a lot of capital T truth out there.
No.
I think it's about the little T truth, but I think a capital T truth is that
totally.
the world is complex. So how are you equipped to navigate it in a systems and in an interpersonal lens.
Is how do we sit in that complexity, and how do you, if it's a very complex theory or something we're working with, sometimes you got to break it down a little bit to make it more understandable while still appreciating, recognizing, and seeing the complexity within it. And scaling up the complexity or embrace of the complexity, because it's of course already there, but trying to embrace more of it as you're maybe more comfortable navigating these spaces. And it's about getting the vocabulary and the trial and error and the talking that I think is valuable about these things.
Yeah, and it has to be playful.
Yeah,
and creative and
Yeah.
exploratory.
I think so much of the, systems change, of course, it's heavy, we're crossing these planetary boundaries.
Yeah.
But I also think there's hope in it because society is collectively shaped. So we can collectively shape it different. But I think, as you're kind of saying, it's about coming together and leaving space for these things. It's about communicating, relationships. These social systems are about relationships at the end of the day. It's about what's happening at this conference, talking, seeing each other, respecting each other, getting space for each other. And that's how we can try and, I think, understand then where do we want to go.
Yeah. I think I get coupled with the actually not knowing position is this learning posture of that's what I felt when I'm at school. And it's we are all here for this shared purpose. That's how I feel at this conference of again, what possibilities are created when everyone says, I'm here to learn. I need you to know that we spoke once on Zoom and exchanged a number of emails. And after our Zoom, I was just ooh, this is someone that I really want to learn from and talk to more. So I'm glad you're sitting here with me today, and we'll have our time at the retreat. So do you want to say anything about yourself or the retreat coming up or anything about this conference and your experiences?
So many things. I think the first thing is maybe just being in the space. So I just, have dropped in. It's lunchtime here. And there's so many folks, and being in an in-person gathering, it's actually something I don't do very much anymore. And we're talking about relationality.
Yep.
And sometimes it's literally the most simple thing as in being in the company of another and how that changes our dynamics and our ability to connect. And so right now I'm staring into your big, beautiful eyes. And, it's just a whole other way of being. And so I think even in just this split second, it's remembering it's actually the simplest of things and how that changes how we engage. And what would that look like if we did more of that? Because I think we've still lost it so much.
Yeah.
We've lost it so much in the last few years after COVID, and coming back. And yeah, so I guess in this second, I'm just saying, let's not take that for granted. I just said to a friend and colleague, Leander, I want my atoms bumping up against your atoms.
I love that. I love that. I absolutely agree. I did a course online, I think last year, that was an adaptation of what had been an in-person course before the pandemic. And the content was really great, but I just felt like there was so much missing from what I'm getting here being in person is the moment where I lean over to the person sitting next to me in the session and we have a little side conversation afterwards, or just that those in-between moments that are so full of life and connection. And it's great that Zoom and our computers allow us to connect across the world, and it's not this.
Yes, and you know what, that came up in Mulaney's talk the other day. I love the words betwixt and between because they're a little witchy, actually. And sometimes I like to bring in a little witchy. And it's those spaces, and I think there's actually, we forgot how to tune into those spaces because we move so fast.
Yeah.
And I even, I catch myself all the time. I'm just off rushing to one other thing. It's more than just the presence. It's like the magic of those moments. And I just felt like Mulaney captured that so beautifully. Like that's really the heart of it all. And we're here talking about, how to transform systems and what is systems thinking and all of these things. And I think it's really in those little moments where we have like the penny drop, and the aha moments and the moments of relationality. And when we're rushing, we just don't even give ourselves the opportunity to be in that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna high five you now. High five to the betwixt between phrase. That's exactly why I'm sitting at this table in the middle of the hallway.
To capture those between moments. So thanks, Shauna.
Yeah. Thanks, Abby.
Would you like to say your name, introduce yourself a little bit?
Okay, so my name is Jairo da Costa. I'm originally from Brazil, but I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm an academic, social scientist, product designer by education. And now I'm teaching at the University of Twente. And part of what I do, my title will be Assistant Professor of the Impact of System Thinking in Design. So what I do a lot is try to understand how system theory impacts design and how we can use those to better address more complex societal challenges.
Yeah. What's your experience of the conference been so far?
It's been absolutely great. So I have been in the conference on the early days. I don't quite recollect at this moment. I think it was RSD3 or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Early.
Really in the beginning when I was doing my PhD. And coming back now, I mean, like it's a different crowd, but I love because the energy is still the same. You know, I'm learning a lot and I see different perspectives, and it was a very amazing experience so far. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there one thing from either the workshop that you help lead or the other sessions that you've been in that's really been sticking with you so far?
Oh, surprisingly, I now just participated of there was a conversation studio, and then I was hearing Victor Idoewa, not pronounced wrong. And I was quite surprised that I actually never heard and learned about his work before. And I was so glad that it used to be there because when he was talking about his work, what he does was very amazing because I work a lot with engineers. I am a social scientist and an engineering program. And sometimes I feel that I'm kind of the glue between engineer and social science.
Yeah.
And I felt that on this way, I lose a little bit this part of relational critical thinking. Sometimes you want to do something that bring something that's very pragmatic because this sometimes what being around the engineer context asks to you always, but in general. And I think that what he was talking about, how the different ways of doing his way of seeing relational design, relational systemic thinking is something that resonate a lot to me. So I want to learn more about it.
Yeah. That's great. I've had so many things that I just like jotting down little notes to myself of like these things are going to continue to sit with me. And if definitely new ideas emerge, and I love the experience of something like this conference because I find it such an opportunity to like practice or try on different ways of being. Like for me, there's people talk about FOMO, fear of missing out. I know. And we have this just action-packed conference. There's been weeks of things online. We've got 5 full days of stuff and a retreat. And so for me, I'm looking at the schedule and saying, I want to be in everywhere. I know great conversations are happening everywhere. And so there's a practice for me in kind of just the letting go of, I absolutely am sure every single room is a great conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you're making a trade-off when you choose to go to one session versus the other, or when I choose to actually, I've really taken in a lot today. I need to not go to a session this hour. That's a really hard call to make for me, at least. And so I find myself just trying on a new way of being almost, where it's like letting go of that maybe fear or like worry about what am I missing out on and just being present to whatever's going on.
Yeah. Now I can relate to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this sense, indeed, I try to participate in everything that I could, but I also made some deliberate choices to go to territories that I have been before, to try to listen to stories that are more unfamiliar to me, because I also think that this is an opportunity that I have, not to reinforce the ways of knowing that I know, but to learn different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I felt too going to your session, because personally, just seeing AI in the title has me curious and has me skeptical, because I personally feel a little more wary of AI. And mostly that comes from a place of like, I want to be very informed about it as a tool. And I very much see it's not going anywhere. But again, coming from this interpersonal lens, how are people equipped, empowered, and informed to use it as a tool, to use it in a generative way rather than any kind of destructive.
Yeah, we had a lot of thought actually about should we include or not on the title, but also should we include or not on the workshop. So there was a lot of thoughts on it.
Yeah, but your workshop generated really rich conversation for us, particularly because so just for people listening, I'll give the context. Obviously, you presented us with a system map. And my group of people that I was working with ranged from someone who said that their systems mapping expertise was a 10 to myself who said mine was a 2, which was maybe generous of me to say because I don't have any formal kind of experience with this. But I was like, I know what the word system and map means, so I can, draw some inferences at least as a starting point. And it was such a interesting experiment because you left it so open-ended in a really beautiful way that had us feeling confused in our group, which is initially kind of uncomfortable, but then really good ground to foster great curiosity and questions. And so there's a moment where we're getting to a kind of conclusion as a group that this actually isn't a great systems map. But then there's a moment where I'm like, but do you know it? You gave it to us. Do you know it's not a great system? Just because there's things that we're missing. We had so many questions. And that's oversimplistic to be it's not a great map. But we just had so many follow-up questions. It's not a complete map, maybe. There was a lot missing, we thought. But it was really interesting to be in that uncertainty. And rather than say, well, I need all my questions answered right this second, just say, oh, well, what am I noticing when I'm sitting in the uncertainty of an activity like that?
And definitely, I cannot take all the credit for this workshop because it's really the core work of the PhD that I supervised, Delais Pereira.
Yeah.
And I think he put so much energy, so much effort on it also to bring those conversations about it. So one thing about the map, this is a really real map. We also decided to have some sort of neutrality to not have a map that we designed.
Yeah, right.
So, but was one of these case studies that was part of the research that we done before to propose this workshop. And we also have a lot of questions. You almost contact actually the authors of the paper and the project that was from the system map because we want to know more.
Yeah.
But we also were so concerned about part of the workshop was to understand the level of comprehension that people would have.
Yeah, right.
I didn't want to create this extra influence, but I'm glad that we could create this type of discussions. And we are lucky because indeed there was very respected names. There was people that practice this, people that are have a more informal approach with system, and everything was so valuable for us because we want all of that mixed for us to understand better how should we continue work to make all those to make system thinking, system methodology and tools more inclusive, because this was actually the title. So we are looking to inclusive complexity so that everybody can deal with complexity in different levels. This would be the ideal goal to pursue.
Yeah, and it's so interesting for me to think, again, from this communication perspective, and that's understanding communication as more than just the words we say, but what's the kind of space or tone that you create for communication to happen. There's so much else, out and out layers going on that affect the way we feel like we can show up to each other in terms of stories that I may or may not tell, or things I may or may not think or say or be bringing with me as we, engage in a conversation. And so particularly thinking about myself, the sliver of the experience I had in your workshop, along with last year was my first year of RSD. And so I walked in kind of uncertain about, do I belong here? Am I going to have anything to offer? Am I even going to know what's being talked about? And there's a way where that kind of unsure sense of belonging or not belonging can really shut people down, I think. Or, again, if you've created the conditions for it, it can feel like a more playful place where I can sit in a session about systems maps and AI and your relational capacities framework, which I'm completely unfamiliar with, and not see my not knowing or not see my uncertainty as a flaw or as a weakness, but as a tool or a lens to engage with that would reveal things that other people, the person who's the 10
Yeah.
in expertise of systems mapping, they're going to have great things to offer, but not the same as me. And so we need all of those perspectives, and we need to create the conditions for those perspectives to feel like they can be communicated to, right?
Yeah, that was indeed something that we try. One thing that we also try to pay attention is to practice what we preach.
Yeah.
So in this article and on this workshop, there's a lot is to understand about what are the preconditions actually to be able to apply systemic design in a relational way.
Mhm.
So we hope that indeed we could offer a space where people felt safe to share. And what we want is that to show that the knowledge the value of knowledge, it is in any level. It's not about expert level. It's also not about, but it's more saying that from the experience, just the vivid experience to be there confronted by the map. Because as valuable as an expert that know what every part of the map means, we just really need it all. But we also need to those tools to allow this. Allow that anybody can feel empowered to give their opinion. Just say, to point and say like, no, this shouldn't be here. This should be here. Because ultimately, this is what it is. This is somebody that has experience, lived experience on that system. It's as much to say as somebody that knows, understand how it is, arrows, the relationships, the elements, they're there, and can understand the cause and effect.
Yeah.
We need both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been said a couple times in a couple different ways in sessions over the past 2 days that wherever you are situated within a system, you have a partial perspective. And so it is that that's not necessarily a fault, just a reality. And so if you can find a way to shout across the system to say, hey, you over there, what's your perspective? What are you seeing that I may be not seeing? Then that becomes really generative instead of tricking ourselves into thinking we should be able to have a completely objective or holistic view when that's just not the case. Instead, just figure out how to communicate and coordinate across the system. So
I agree.
Do you come from design practice yourself?
no, not at all. Last year was my first RSD, and that was my introduction to systems thinking and design. And again, I'm just rooted in interpersonal communication. And it was just a beautifully emergent time that I had last year. That it felt to me like happenstance that I got to be a part of this group that had already decided they wanted to do a workshop at RSD. That then there was someone that could help me fund my travel all the way to Oslo. I'm from Indiana.
That's incredible.
It really happened really beautifully. And there's also a colleague that I have worked with at the CMM Institute for a number of years who lived in Norway, who I had never got to meet in person before. But just the really beautiful side story of this is that I got to meet this person because she lived in Norway, just outside of Oslo. And this conference happened to be in Oslo. And she had, the whole time I've known her, had been fighting cancer. And she passed away, I think a week after I met her, which was devastating. Yeah. And also really special too, again, just the way all of these things came together that I got to be there. So RSD holds a very special place in my heart. And I've had a couple people on my podcast since last year that gave keynotes or different presentations last year because I just have felt so curious about this intersection of the interpersonal and systemic. And something that's always front of mind for me is that communication is such a vibrant, co-created process. And we have such strong stories that we show up with about how we should or should not act. What is or is not okay or allowed.
What are the rules?
What are the rules? Yes. And, ugh. And so for me, helping people to embody a communication perspective, looking at communication instead of through it, seeing themselves as the active participants. Communication creates our social worlds. There's so much possibility that opens up when you start to view yourself and others in that way. To have language, step one, and then action. Right. To say there's told and untold stories here. And it's not necessarily that I need to turn all of your untold stories into told stories for me, but even just acknowledging that you have untold stories that you're showing up to this table today with.
Has value.
Yes. And that can influence how we interact together. There's so much there.
That's lovely.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I am Lorian Randall, and I work as an independent consultant, doing systemic design practice quite often when I'm fortunate enough to have clients who are open and interested in doing that level of work. Looks really different and feels different depending on the scale that I'm kind of at. But it's been something that I've been doing without knowing that's what I was doing since about 2015.
Hi. That's really wonderful. And you, just to share something that is coming back up for me right now, you prefaced before this conversation, you said, well, I'm not an academic. And I felt in a lot of ways coming into this space, a lot of uncertainty as well about my identity, 100% of belonging or not in this group. And I've kind of practice, until it's real. Fake it till you make it of like, no, I belong here.
Yeah.
Sure, I do belong here. And so I'm learning a lot, and I hope offering some new perspective as well. And I'm really interested in how I was, just first introduced to you at this very table a couple hours ago of we're surrounded by maps right now that are part of an exhibit. And you have included a non-sanctioned map on the walls. And I wondered if you would talk about your convivial rebellion in that way.
And it's interesting to also recognize that many of the maps that are on the wall were created by students of mine when I taught systems thinking and systemic design approaches in the Strategic Foresight and Innovation program here at OCAD in the Graduate Studies Master of Design. And so I'm not only in an unsanctioned map, but I also have some student work represented in some of the more sanctioned side. So I recognize there is less rebellion in my convivial rebellion than was likely, would be real for many other people. But so I do a lot of work in spaces between things. Myself, I'm a person who is always in the space between things. I tell people I have a space between my teeth because I love working in the spaces between things.
Oh, yeah.
I find as a person who is autistic, I also am frequently in a space that is not, I don't fit here and I don't fit there. And I have a lot of ways of connecting in my brain that are novel and sometimes show up as weird to people. And so I feel like that idea of the unsanctioned map came from this thing of me feeling like, well, part of my work in my life has been both to be a convivial rebel and also to teach convivial rebels.
Yeah.
And to identify convivial rebels in my consulting work. And it was something that I toyed with just in my own mind because I was trying to figure out, like, what do I call these people who are like,
yeah.
And I see them all the time. And I've been one when, like, often if you're the only designer that's brought in and work in house somewhere and it's not like a creative environment, like,
I bet.
And you're a team of one.
Oh, yeah.
You're sometimes the only person that like pushes on things in ways that other people think is problematic. And sometimes people in systems are trying to do something and they are more willing to like figure out how to get something done for people in a way that kind of not always, subverts the system, but maybe like extends the boundaries against which you should be working. And then also teaching design is often about teaching the traits and abilities of figuring out where the rules are and how you can break them in a way that enables, novelty and joy and best fit for the conditions in which you are designing. And so that's what the map is, just introducing the idea of convivial rebellion, because being a person who doesn't fit, not an academic, I don't identify as an academic. I went to a 2-year program for graphic design at a local community college. And I came into the SFI program as a student in 2013 or 2014. And was just blown away that I found a space that had what I called my weirds they were not like me, but we were all weird in similar ways. And so I thought, oh, I'm in a room of convivial rebels, right? Who are all doing things in different ways, but like we don't have tools and approaches to do this. But I'm now realizing that many of the things that I learned as a designer and design skills are actually the tools of convivial rebellion, which is being willing to question.
Yep.
Being able to sense. Being curious, being open, using material like practices of making to build understanding, and then using those things to then also provoke like is this the thing? Like, am I right? You like to get feedback.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I'm now at the point where this is now in my mind a theory of like systemic transformation that I don't think exists right now, which is much of the change of what we call systems transformation is happening at a micro level of small acts
Yes.
of convivial rebellion that people are choosing.
Yes.
Either whether they are in the system or not in the system, but tiny acts where the system can cushion bend a little bit to allow for change to be brought in. And often that happens in compassion.
Yes.
Because many systems, depending on what, if you're talking about like an institution, like let's say a health system, comes from a place of like support and compassion and whatever. But many of the structures that exist to make that system happen are not compassionate structures.
Yeah.
Like a budget is not necessarily going to allow space for an edge case.
Yeah. And I would say along with that compassion, curiosity, which you already mentioned, is just like the top of the top.
Right. And wanting to even consider something other than what is.
Exactly. So for me, the thing under all of this, it is it is interpersonal. It's happening. Is our communication is generative and real and tangible and just like life-giving, and it creates our social worlds. Like that relationship is so real. And so people can have that just like mantras, and the meaning is socially constructed. Everything is socially constructed. Then when you interact with something that the world says is weird or normal, you can say, well, that's just because somebody decided that that's what it meant a long time ago. We can decide something different. And I love that. Like, and what you're saying about this identity piece almost is, at least what I'm hearing, is like, I only have an undergraduate degree right now. I'd love to go back and get my master's. So I just decided not to go straight into it. And I'm doing exactly what I would want to be doing anyway. Yeah. So why would I kill that momentum? And I interact with a lot of great people who believe that I have something to offer. And I appreciate that. And every once in a while I bump up against someone that's like, well, you need to go do another degree to be credible. I'm like, disagree. I can see that you're making meaning in this way.
So I think it's that for me too. And it shows up for me in my family history. My grandfather only went to grade 3 and started smoking when he was 7, which I just think is this image in my mind of her tiny little Ukrainian boy in Manitoba smoking cigarettes at 7 years old. Anyway.
Yeah.
But he was a self-taught airplane mechanic during World War II.
Wow.
And then became a mechanic and worked, well, not just a mechanic, he became a foreman at the General Motors plant in St. Catharines, and eventually was a supervisor of team that included people who were credentialed engineers. He's literally self-taught almost every skill he has.
There's so many different ways of learning.
Right.
That again, if we can expand our meaning,
What
then we can say, yeah, these are valuable ways of knowing. And I think people often would identify a quote unquote communication failure as that moment where someone goes, I don't understand what you're saying right now. But I would say the real failure is if that happens and you don't respond with curiosity, because the tools of a communication perspective, a clarifying question, so important. What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
What does it mean to me?
Yeah.
And we say that, we name that for each other and explore that together, like those kind of clarifying questions that help us like name the process of what's going on in our communication. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm showing up with a lot of defensiveness right now because this is really kind of taking me back to previous experience I had where I kind of felt unsafe. So let me just like name that. That's what I'm coming to this with, or I'm telling the story right now in my head that this is what I'm hearing you say. Is that what you're saying? Is that, here's how it's impacting me? There's these great questions. Like, it's like just this idea that it doesn't have to be left up to chance. It doesn't have to be guesswork. With language tools and questions that can guide us through those, what feel like communication failures or moments of misunderstanding.
And I feel like those language and question pieces are taught to people as material design practice work that is literally human practice work.
Yeah.
And it's limited to spaces like this. We need places like this. I'm never going to, not want an art school in the world. But my biggest heartbreak in the work that I do is when I meet people who are incredible, creative, brilliant, and every human is a creative designer in every way. And they say things to me like, but I'm not creative. And I say, you tell me more about that. Is that right? Right. So tell me more about where that comes from. And people will say, well, I used to love to draw. And then I was like, oh my God, it's embarrassing. Or somebody made fun of my picture. Or I stopped doing it when I was like in grade 7 or whatever. And I have said to people like, you are not artistic, maybe, but you are creative. And your creativity shows up in ways that you maybe don't recognize our creativity. And I've had people cry when I say that to them because they feel seen in a way that like I feel like is really not doing justice to how much creativity is a critical social tool. And like how much of it teaches you how to be open and curious about other people.
Absolutely.
And I think part of my challenge in doing work in systemic transformation is believe it's a project that happens from here to here. And that was, and quite often, especially if you're doing it in consulting, you're brought in by someone who's paying for you to do systemic transformation, which is like, they don't actually want the system to transform outside of their existence. Like,
absolutely.
They want you to like, do some maintenance, like make it a little bit better. But often, I shouldn't say that's a broad generalization, but that's guru. But in doing that work, it doesn't actually recognize the lived experience and reality of what it's like to operate within systems that are like that. And we can be very strategic about how we want systems and systemic transformation to happen, but you can't ever design in systems. Like you can't design outcomes because they're emergent. So when you ever design for an outcome, that
absolutely
can't actually, it's not like a graphic design project. This is very different. However, I think that the change lives at both the global and local levels. And so I think recognizing where you have convivial rebellion is seeing where there are instances of people who are operating in ways to enable things that are areas of need, or change, or whatever, that they perceive, right? Like I'm very real that sometimes these people are not doing good, or they may be putting things at risk that are not valid. Like that is, I understand that.
That's all about perception.
But I do think that there are, we call it sometimes like folk wisdom. And I think that's wisdom.
Yeah, right.
And in the same way that we view a system as like the transformation doesn't happen within individual levels, we're thinking of it at big levels. It is also always happening at an individual level in every decision that gets made, in every choice of words and actions, and every step that you make. And that is how the system gets created. In design, you look at those, they'll show you an image of like what it looks like for a wear pattern to show you how people actually use, the sidewalk goes on a 90-degree angle and somebody cut a path through the dirt. And it's like, this is what humans do. And I think that is also what it looks like in systems where there are people who are doing things a certain way. Maybe are not aligned with what we believed it should look like.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's because they're doing things in ways that work better.
Yeah.
Or that are meeting needs that are not identified or not even able to be served by structures.
I think we really, really limit ourselves by being controlled by shoulds.
Yes.
So much. And so, there's so much more imagination and creativity that can happen. And I feel like I'm on my own journey of like finding a like playfulness that you have as a child and then gets like out of you because you actually become a teenager who's just trying to fit in. And so you lose all of that quote unquote weirdness that we've meaned that way, created meaning in that way. So there's so much to say here, Lorraine.
I like to end with a prompt.
Please, I love it.
And my prompt is for anyone who's listening or in the field where this is at least somewhere in your awareness. See how your actions are supporting or contributing to outcomes that maybe you're not aligned with. And look for areas that you, recognize, yes, you have to contend with some things. You can't always change everything. But look for things you can change and what you might change. And consider where there are maybe alternatives and look outside of things to figure out what you might bring in that can bring in, care, compassion, curiosity. Love the C words.
Love it. Thank you, Lorraine.
You're welcome.
Do you want to introduce yourself? I'm glad you stopped by since you've been behind the scenes of this conference so much. You could maybe give people an interesting insight into what it's been like on your side of things.
Yeah, no, I wanted to join in. I feel regret that I didn't have a chance to go to DIE installation, but I did actually have a chat with Jen and all, so it's okay. And also, I want to participate. I really think that these are the experience that people would remember.
Yeah.
These are also the experience that make a conference to feel interesting, not just people running from one room to another.
Yeah.
There are like some flexibility. People can, join different activities. So I've been meaning to. Now I'm here.
What has RSD14 been like for you behind the scenes?
Oh, okay, yeah. By the way, you asked me to introduce myself and I skipped that. I'm Celine, so I'm a project manager for this one. Like you said, it's behind the curtain. It's very interesting, actually. It's a character development for me.
Yeah, I bet. Oh my goodness.
Like dealing with a lot of people, so like you also have to change yourself to deal with different people.
Yeah.
In a way that like some people actually talk about leadership as like this kind of leadership, that kind of leadership, without you managing something. And when you're working with, also because you're working with volunteers,
Yeah.
you can't be like, okay, this is my kind of leadership and I'm going to do what I like to do. It's not like that. You have to lead in a way that is good for them so that they're going to do something good for you. Yeah. So like in that kind of learning and this kind of the process that I learned during this organizing, it's very, very nice. It's very valuable for me. This is the reason also why I said character development. So that is a boring like managing and organizing stuff, but
that it makes sense, that it really like forces you to be really thoughtful about how you're engaging, because it is all relational. Like something, I absolutely agree that this week has been a character development week for me too. I was thinking, I imagine it's for a lot of people when you come together in a group, that like something that's been front of mind for me, because I'm really interested in the, kind of seeming paradox of like design, kind of lumping that in with plans and maybe an element of control and intentionality versus something like emergence and mystery and unfolding.
yeah.
I've thought a lot about time this week at this conference, because we have this packet that I imagine you and Cheryl and others have worked really hard on this schedule. of who's doing what when and how long it's taking. And here's the information. And then the reality of this week has been not so neat in terms of things are happening not on that exact timeline. And so for me, who does like to have a little bit of a plan and like to know what's coming up, there was a moment early on when I was kind of sensing like, oh, things are a little more loose, a little more flexible here. I was like, ooh, that makes me feel a little stressed. But then I'm thinking about, okay, well, I have this very Western idea of time and punctuality and, one way of making meaning around time that is just that, just one way of many. And so I've been trying to like distance myself from that a little bit, or like try on a different way of thinking of like, what if I didn't see this, difference in relationships to time as a bad thing necessarily, but just open myself up to these experiences of being more flexible about time. So I'm just interested in what that's been like for you too. The like, you work so hard on the back end of things all these days, weeks, months, I imagine, leading up to this conference. And then the conference starts. And it just happens how it happens. And so there's that balance, I imagine, for you of all the things you've worked hard to intentionally create and then letting go and letting things happen how they're going to happen.
Actually, since this conference started, I'm letting things go.
Yeah. You have to. You probably really have to. You drive yourself crazy out of
Exactly. So things are moving in its own way, but there are sometimes that you also have to be in that flow.
Mhm.
So like being part of the crowd, and you sometimes think that because you're part of the crowd, you can't do anything about it. It's not right. You are part of the crowd, and crowd is the ones who is moving, right?
Yeah.
So you can actually direct the crowd into somewhere. So you still move around with the crowd a little bit. Then you're trying to flow at the same time. You're also control. I don't know whether it is making sense or not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's also because like my positions also maybe as a project management, I try to also control the things that I think, okay, it might probably make sense, but then sometimes it's not up to me whether it is making sense.
You said earlier about like leadership or working with people, it is relational. It is the like co-creative process. And so you can control the way you show up. And then there's a number of things that fall into that category of missteering that you just have to be like flexible and adapt to.
Yeah. Sometimes also, like one thing I really like regret about organizing and doing back end, like you said, it's like people can switch their heads, right? So I'm this person now, and then I want to be that person later,
Yeah.
right? But then you can't change that much. For example, if I am in managing, but my like philosophical or conceptual hat cannot be on that much.
Yeah.
Right. I'm more in a management hat,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my brain is working in that way.
Yeah.
But then when you are participating, I was also part of the conversation studio. So I also trying to, like contribute as much as I can conceptually, right? So that was difficult, but it was nice. I mean, the reason why I joined and why I take on that role is because of that. I want to be part of this. But sometimes when you are managing, then you miss out on, like, for example, the workshops that I want to join. Sometimes the conversation studio that is parallel that I want to join. And also when you are listening to things, you're not really that absorbing because you're also trying to like manage some of the things at the same time. So so that's also, again, character development again.
Probably like a different kind of presence, I would think, that you're able to have. Because, for example, just like what I've observed is we're sitting in this large room where maybe a talk keynote is happening. And I see you sitting over to the side at the desk where kind of the technical aspects are being run. And so you're there and you're present and you're hearing the words. And you're also, I imagine, tuned into the PowerPoint. And is it moving along? And are the mics picking up? And is the recording, like, if people are coming up and talking to you, whispering things in your ear? But I saw that you are, I imagine, like you said, you're very quickly changing out these different hats moment to moment, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but just a different place to be in than like me as just more of a pure participant in a session where I'm just sitting there and I'm locked in and I'm taking notes and thinking of questions and, no one's tapping on my shoulder needing anything.
Yeah. That's yeah, I think like in a relational aspect of that, it might probably be like you are also part of this whole scene. Like it is also part of like relating to what the keynote is talking about, and you can actually relate to it. But at the same time, you also know what are the things that's leading up to that keynote, and you can somehow relate it to all of those. Also, somehow when you are actually looking at from the like different levels of pictures that you are seeing, like it's a very like ground level, practical level, and then how it actually came about to this keynote speech, and then making that keynote speech happen. But sometimes like the concept, the philosophy or the concept sometimes takes some time in your brain to actually realize something to break it down. Right. But then to break it down, you don't have that much of a space in your brain to actually to break it down. So that is the only thing to actually
it takes a little more time. Well, just wrapping up one more question. Do you have a favorite moment of the conference so far as we're in the last hours here of it? Or something else that's sticking with you that you will continue to think about?
No, I do think that like the moment that I joined the conversation studio, me as a speaker, as an author, I did enjoy that because it's also the reason why I am taking this role, right? So I did enjoy talking about what I want to do and what has been like what how I can connect with the work that I want to do and what other people actually want to do. So it's actually just really good at that one. That's like favorite moment. But like if you are asking me about the experience when I said this character development and all, it's definitely it's the life changing experience which because you are developing some part of your character. So I think the whole experience is really nice, and I would say just
Thanks, Sulan. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
My name is Zad Khan, and I'm a graduate of the Strategic Foresight Innovation Program. So that's how I was introduced to RSD community. I was making the joke earlier that I was like at RSD 2016, and it was October. The semester had just started. It's the first semester, so I have no idea. But I was just like, oh, something's on, so I'll go to it. And I make the joke that like, oh, like I didn't understand anything then. And then 9 years later, I still don't understand yet. I was sitting in the same spot, so it was a nice full circle 9-year thing. The thing that I'd like to share, and I'm here with my partner Selma, and why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll get into the topic.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Samah Kamalmaz. I'm also a graduate of the SFI program at OCAD University. I'm a strategic designer now, but before SFI, I wore many design hats. So I did interior architecture for 6-7 years, and then I did some user experience design, some graphics design, and then I got into SFI. And so post SFI, I was doing mostly research into urban planning and technologies and generative design used in urban planning. So that's me.
And now you're here at RSD.
Now we're here at RSD. And so the thing that kind of both stood out to us, but also maybe a little bit of we had a paper that we wrote for this, and our paper comes from a critique perspective of the systemic design world.
Yeah.
So we were slightly nervous about how to present and talk about that. But we were very, I would say, like, we appreciated the receptivity of the ideas that we were sharing. And I'll just share a little bit about that, which is that there was this idea that so much of the integration of design into systems thinking starts to push the practitioner, the systemic designer, into a world of like the bias for action starts to just come out more aggressively, especially in domains where
the opposite might be true. You may want to have a higher bias for learning and perhaps being more cautious with when to act or when not to. We were using the word, and I'm going to be careful with my wording now because we got caught and slapped on the wrist with when not to intervene. Yeah, with non-action is the key word, when not to. So to clarify for those listening, not acting, but when to not intervene. So honestly, I won't elaborate too much for the purpose of it, but I'll just say like that's what our experience was. Our experience was, what's it like to introduce a critical
Yeah.
idea that actually critiques this
Yeah.
community?
Yeah.
But also like have conversation about it. And I'll share a little bit more about what I think was a positive reception. But before I do, is there anything else I want to speak to? about the
Yeah,
idea?
maybe I can share. My perspective is that I did not start where that started in terms of like non-intervention. So when you're in SFI, you kind of get introduced maybe second year into the Systems Thinking Ontario group, and that's where David Ng and Peter Jones kind of like have this community of practice meeting, and that's when I started to kind of learn some new concepts outside of SFI, and then I got to learn more about from that as well about non-intervention. And like my first reaction to it was that this doesn't make any sense. We have to intervene. Yeah. Except non-intervention, you have to do something about what's wrong. And so it's been a journey for me. Like for a year and a half or 2 years, I feel like I've gradually started to understand more about that philosophy, and maybe kind of also internalize it and feel like, yeah, that does make sense. You can't be always in one mode of intervention. You can kind of move in between the two modes.
That I was so glad to be talking about this with the two of you, because I was honestly hoping for a chance to talk about this with someone today. I found myself at the aquarium last night, and I was sitting down for a moment and looking at this large window. I'm watching this ecosystem just happen. And the window I was looking at was just this really beautiful slice that I was getting to witness of not only fish, but all kinds of nature, animals, beings that are living and breathing and working together. And there's a lot of people walking. I was kind of sitting back, and there's this space where people could walk by, and I'm watching people come and take pictures and look and walk away. And I was just like, I'm looking at a system right now that, outside of humans building the aquarium, if I'm thinking about it occurring naturally in the ocean, this is a system that humans did not design. And so it just got me really curious about, I don't know if I would say like undesigned or just like, and from a communication perspective, would absolutely agree with you too. Like curiosity is the most important tool. The drive for learning, the posture of learning, the being in a position of not knowing and letting that, lead your curiosity. But it's interesting for me to think about questioning the way that meaning has been made in maybe a community like systemic design, and saying, well, what is there to learn from systems that we didn't design and that we don't need to or should not, or fill in the blank, intervene it. So there's just, I think, really something to learn there. So I'm glad that you two are leading the charge on doing that questioning as well.
Well, that's what I was gonna come to. I'm not sure. My positive surprises, I'm not sure if we're leading the charge. It sounds like there's a large number of people here that are sharing that similar.
Right, yeah.
So that took a huge load of relief off. One thing I forgot to mention, just to go back, is like, yeah, I do co-organize and host like a monthly Systems Thinking Ontario where we kind of get together, and so we extend our thinking. Like, what do you do? Where do you go to learn about systems once you graduated? So it's kind of a place for that. And that's where I found it was often more interesting to talk to people who don't describe themselves as systems thinkers, but they do work in all types of different systems that you can learn from. So that's just a sidebar about it. But going back to the positive reception that I think, and what I wanted to share in this conversation, is that it seems like there's so we just got out of a session, just because of the recency effect, it's in my mind about Cheryl Hsu, David Ng, and the other speaker,
Ruth Schmidt.
Ruth Schmidt at this moment, talking about charismatic authority, and Cheryl Hsu was talking about the transversal thorough approach to the work that she's doing. And I know she'll shoot in some other settings as well, also an SFI grad. And Tobias yesterday was talking about non-intervening in his map or in his demonstration of how he uses it in his locations. And Peter Jones this morning was talking about the long arc, and we channel a lot of Peter Jones because he was also a mentor to us as well. So I really don't have anything more profound to say. I was just saying my story is one, or our story is one of like nervousness of how to share a critique, but then coming here and being like, oh, other people are already vibing with that.
Yeah.
They're already sensing it. They're already talking about it. So you're just adding to what is something that's emerging. And that's just a reflection point for me.
Absolutely. That's really beautiful. Anything else you want to add to what your experience has been?
I mean, I want to comment on what you mentioned about curiosity. I think that is a very great point. That to me, my learning through this first journey about learning about systems and non-intervention is that it's not non-intervention just for the sake of non-intervention. It's like the benefit is that if you kind of give yourself a pause to learn and just be curious and really understand things just for the sake of understanding. So that's why I like really your point about curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Can I add one more thing? I forgot to mention, or you mentioned it, and it made me think, is like you used the word posture very organically. And that was the title. Sorry, not the title. That's where we were. The title of our paper and talk was Humbling Systemic Design, Learning When Not to Intervene in Complex Social Systems. But the way, and by the way, like we're or I guess I'm kind of like some of the academic. I would write an academic paper differently depending on which day or time you ask me to.
Absolutely.
That's not what I'm saying as a joke. Is like that's not my mode.
Uh-huh.
But I had to do it for the mission purpose. So our recording is a lot more organic for me of how to like present. And I come from a background of work where over sliding is the thing to do. Like there's an aesthetic. As much as people have critiques and about slides, there's like an aesthetic that it comes with and a narrative with a communication background.
Oh, yeah.
I may appreciate that mode. But I was going to say, you mentioned the word very organic posture. And what Sama and I were thinking about, what is this thing about humbling design? What is it? And we're like, we don't want to add another method. We don't want to talk about a framework. There's already so many, like, yes, there's a lot of mindsets. And we're just like, oh, it's like kind of like a posture. Like, how are you sitting up when you're working on something deeply complex that you don't know how it's going to end? And so we call it a humble posture in systemic design.
Yeah.
I guess so I just found that interesting that you mentioned that word, and I wanted to connect that point.
I think that's really beautiful language. And again, communication is not only language, but that's a very important part of it, specifically, the power of naming. And I think there is a kind of naming or communication or shared meaning making that generally should happen before action or intervention happens. And sometimes that step is skipped. But thinking about my own experience with this community too, like last year was my first RSD ever. And what brought me back was the amazing experience I had of language that I wish I could remember who someone specifically said that I instantly was like, that describes my experience, that it was just this great collective learning. And I can picture myself sitting at walking into the first day of workshops, sitting down at a table, some other people filing in, and the people at the table starting to introduce themselves, saying, well, I'm this kind of designer, I'm this kind of designer, I went here, I work here, I do this. And it got to me and I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea what any of you were talking about. And I have no idea how to introduce myself. And I'm instantly feeling some insecurity about that. And so I think I took the week and this year even more to give myself a chance to practice this again, what I would consider a posture, like orientation of what if I saw my own inexperience or different experience than most of the people of this community, not as a weakness or as a liability, but as just I'm speaking from a different lens. And so earlier this week in a workshop, I'm in a group with Jonathan Rahm, and they ask us to rank on a scale of 1 to 10 our expertise as systems mapping. And he's like, I think I can say I'm a 10. And I was like, I think I'm a 2. And I was like, but let me not. I did try to sit back and really listen to what else was being said in the group. instead of assuming that I knew things. But there did come a point where I was like, oh, I still think I have something to add here. And I have a perspective that the other people who are more ingrained in the system don't have. And so that's just been a really good practice for me of something that is humbling to myself and also humbles the communities to say, what if we're open to critiques or curiosity or questions about how we've collectively made meaning? If we're not open to that, then we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I feel like before coming to the conference and thinking about, oh, what are we going to share and what are we going to talk about? There's this kind of like maybe nervousness or excitement. And then you kind of start, once you mingle with people and talk, you realize that, oh yeah, maybe we're using different terms. And we think initially that we're talking about different things. But then you realize that it's probably closer than we think. It's just the terms might be different, might be unfamiliar. Maybe we use different, I don't know, expressions to talk about the same thing or close. And so that to me was very interesting to kind of see how different people share the same ideas, but in different ways.
Well, also it's like, even if I'm glad that you were met with a warmer welcome than you anticipated for your critiques or questions or perspective. But also, if people didn't instantly understand what you were talking about, that doesn't like invalidate your perspective either. And I feel like that's a communication for me. It's a communication skill that people need to practice, probably, of, again, just the idea of like situating themselves in a larger sense of there being multiple perspectives and stories. So, yeah. Okay, yes, we can be wrapping up. Is there any last things you want to say about your experience at RSD14 this year?
One funny thing I'm saying is that, like, although I was describing the positive, what we don't know is what those who didn't come up to us after. We may totally maybe people who, I'm saying, oh, it's a positive thing, but then maybe people are like,
I'm sure not everyone loved our ideas about like, oh, we don't need to be calling emergencies the crime. Not everyone agrees.
That's good. We can end on the note of the unknown, which influences us just as much.
the right note to end on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. First, you're always welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections, questions, and ideas. There are also a number of online spaces where you can comment, including the Stories Lived, Stories Told Instagram and the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all these places to connect are in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date, a couple things you can do are follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to get every episode right in your inbox. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives, including our other podcast, Cosmo Parenting, and all our free Cosmo activities, as well as Cosmopolis 2045. There's also the CMM Institute Fellowship and the CMM Institute Press. We have so many great resources that we are so excited to share. Again, links to all of that can be found in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abby, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.